Lightning splits the sky as rain lashes the plain, turning earth to mud and night into a long, wet test. Early humans huddle under bent branches and low brush, teeth chattering, trying to shield fires from the wind. Predators circle beyond the dim glow, their cries a constant threat. Hunger and cold press in together. Each shallow hollow or rock overhang becomes a fragile refuge for ours. There are no doors, no roofs, only the endless sky, and with it the first question: how do we make shelter against such nights? Again, across endless plains and shadowed forests, small bands of humans move together, their footsteps guided by herds, rivers, and the shifting seasons. Survival means never staying in one place too long, always searching, always cautious, always watching the horizon. But when the sun begins to sink, a heavier question rises. Where will they sleep tonight? Beneath toppled trees, inside dense thickets, or crouched beneath cold stone ledges. They make fragile camps. Dawn offers little rest, and night never grants peace. With predators prowling and storms unbroken, the hunt for shelter defines every heartbeat of their wandering lives. A jagged cliff face, a hollow carved by time, or the yawning mouth of a cave. These were not just shadows in the stone. For early humans, they were salvation. A storm could rage above, winds tearing across the plains. Yet inside these rocky shelters, there was stillness. Predators stalked the night, but with only one entrance to guard, fear lessened. For the first time, families could gather without trembling at every sound. Fires glowed at cave mouths, casting defiance into the dark. These shelters were borrowed, not built, yet they sparked a realization the land itself could protect. They were not homes as we know them, but they were the first spark of the idea. A crack in the stone, a hollow in the earth. These places gave more than shelter. They offered a pause from fear, a fragile sense of belonging, and a glimpse of continuity. In a world of chaos, in firelight reflected against cave walls, survival began to shift into something greater. The notion of home was born, faint yet unshakable, marking the first step on a path that would one day lead to villages, cities, and civilizations. They enter cautiously, torches crackling against stone that has never felt human breath. The cave is cold, its echoes unsettling. Yet it offers what the open plains never could: walls that do not sway in the wind. A ceiling that does not vanish with the storm. Rain, snow, and scorching winds are left outside, while a single guarded entrance turns danger into something manageable. Smoke from the fire rises and lingers, sealing them in a fragile cocoon of warmth and light. For the first time, nights pass without constant flight. The cave is no longer just shelter, it is fortress and refuge dock within the darkness of stone walls. Survival slowly gave way to something deeper. Fires burned not only for warmth, but to cast light on visions drawn across the cave's surface. Hands pressed in ochre left prints that still whisper across millennia, proof that someone was here, someone who wanted to be remembered. On walls, animals came alive. Bison, horses, deer, painted with care in places like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain. In the wavering firelight, the figures seemed to move, becoming both story and spirit. Perhaps they were rituals, perhaps lessons for hunters, or offerings to unseen powers. Whatever their purpose, the caves became humanity's first galleries, where survival and imagination met, and memory was carved into stone. The cave, for all its promise, was never without peril. Many were already claimed by predators, bears, lions, and hyenas whose dominance echoed in the dark. Some hid unseen dangers, sudden pits that swallowed the careless, air thick with gases that choked the breath, or floods that surged without warning after heavy rain. Every entrance was a gamble, every step into shadow a test of judgment. Families learned to pause, to listen for growls, to smell for death before crossing the threshold. What seemed a refuge could just as easily become a tomb, stone walls closing. In with silent finality, flames cracked against the dark, torches raised high as humans stepped into caves already claimed by beasts. Fire roared louder than their voices, its light forcing lions and hyenas back into the night. At cave mouths, glowing embers became walls of defiance, a fragile but powerful line between humanity and the wild. Bones buried deep in cave floors reveal the struggle's clashes where survival meant victory over predators. Each battle was more than a fight for shelter. It was a step toward mastery. To hold a cave was to hold territory, to conquer fear, and to carve dominion from stone. Caves offered safety, yet that safety came at a cost. Life inside meant shadows pressing in from every side, air thick with smoke, and days measured by the flicker of fire rather than the warmth of the sun. Protection from storms and predators demanded a trade, distance from the open world, beyond the stone walls, over generations. The yearning for light and space grew stronger. The cave had been teacher and refuge, but not destiny. In time, humanity would step back into the open, carrying the first vision of what a home could be. Across windswept plains, the horizon offers nothing but open sky and relentless weather. With no caves to retreat into, families move vulnerable and exposed every storm of threat that could strip them bare. Yet in this emptiness, necessity forces a spark of creativity. Branches are pulled together, grass is piled thick, vines twist into knots that hold fragile frames upright. At first, clumsy and uncertain, these shelters fall and are built again, each attempt stronger than the last. Here, invention takes root. Protection is no longer borrowed from nature, it is shaped by human hands. The first fragile step toward architecture. The first shelters were little more than skeletons of wood, bent and tied into cones, their frames breathing with the wind. Families wove branches together, layering grass and leaves until the wild air outside was muffled to a whisper. In harsher climates, animal hides stretched across the structure, sealing warmth within. These huts were fragile, yet they marked a turning point. For the first time, people shaped the land into something of their own making. A doorway appeared, and with it, a boundary between chaos and safety. Inside, shadows flickered by the fire, and fear gave way to belonging. These huts were not just barriers against cold, they were declarations that humanity could design its own survival. Amid the frozen silence of Ice Age Europe, humans built shelters from the remains of the giants they hunted. Mammoth tusks curved skyward, massive ribs locked together like ancient beams, forming frameworks sturdy enough to face the endless winds. Over these, thick hides were stretched, sealing warmth against the steppes' deadly chill. Archaeologists uncover clusters of such dwellings, bone huts ranged in circles where families gathered close. Imagine the glow of firelight, flickering through ivory arches, a fragile warmth in a hostile world. These shelters were not just homes, they were monuments to survival. Proof that human ingenuity could carve life from extinction's edge for generations. Survival meant clinging to caves and cliffs, borrowing safety from the earth. But with the rise of hand-made huts, a boundary was crossed, no longer tethered to nature's shelters. Humans could choose where to settle. Each structure, fragile yet defiant, was proof of control over a wild world. Against the storm, walls woven by hand stood tall, symbols of pride and persistence. Here began the first true homes crafted, not foundries shaping humanity's relationship with the land forever. Though the huts of grass and bone crumbled with time, they carried something far greater than shelter. They carried the idea that safety could be shaped by human will. Each fragile wall was a rehearsal, a sketch for the lasting homes yet to come. Within their frames lay more than warmth and cover, there was belonging. From these beginnings rose villages and cities, proof that even the most fragile experiments can spark the architecture of civilization itself. At first, the home was nothing more than a shield-thin wall standing against rain, cold and hungry predators. Yet, as time passed, its role began to change. Inside huts of wood, bone, or woven grass, families gathered not only for warmth, but for life itself. These walls held laughter, arguments, whispered stories, and plans for tomorrow's hunt. Shelter was no longer just survival. It was the spark of belonging. Within these fragile enclosures, identity took root, and the first outlines of society were drawn, homes becoming the heartbeat of human existence. When fire found its place within the home, it reshaped existence. Flames pushed back the endless. Night held predators at a distance and wrapped cold huts in a cocoon of warmth. Yet its power went beyond survival. Fire drew families inward, gathering them into circles where food was shared, silence respected, and laughter carried in the smoke. Around its glow, stories took form, elders passing down myths, lessons, and warnings to the young. Shadows leapt across walls, turning simple huts into stages of ritual and song. The hearth became a heartbeat, binding scattered people into community. In its light, the first sparks of culture flickered alive, shaping tradition, memory, and belonging. With fire at its heart, the home became more than a shelter, it was a border between two worlds. Inside, warmth and voices filled the air. Outside, darkness held storms, hunger, and prowling beasts. That fragile wall of wood, grass, or bone was a declaration. Here begins safety, there begins danger. In this divide, people discovered the power of belonging. The hut was not only a roof over heads, but a statement of ownership, of unity, of family. Within its glow, identity formed, and humanity's first communities were carved from fear and bound together by firelight. Wind screamed across the plains, tearing at the earth, while rain hammered and predators cried in the dark. Yet within, a small hut, firelight glowed, children's laughter rang out, and elders wove stories that stitched generations together. The walls were thin, branches and hides barely holding, but the feeling inside was unshakable warmth, safety, belonging. For the first time, people were not just surviving against the storm, they were creating a world apart from it. In that fragile glow, the hut became something sacred, a sanctuary of spirit. The fire at the heart of a single hut carried a promise greater than warmth. It showed that protection could be multiplied, that where one family found safety, many families could stand together. Clusters of shelters rose, their fires glowing like constellations across the dark plains. In these gatherings, cooperation became the law of survival, and survival grew into society. Farming, trade, and leadership all sprouted from these fragile beginnings. Civilization's first breath was not in stone temples, but in grass huts, alive with light, laughter, and community. In the Stone Age, caves stood as more than empty chambers of stone. They became sanctuaries. Inside their echoing walls, families huddled close to the fire, its glow pushing back the cold and the creatures that prowled outside. These dark shelters offered something new, not just survival, but a sense of belonging. The soot marks that still blackened ceilings, the crude carvings etched into walls, and the ancient hearts buried in ash all carry the imprint of lives rooted in place. For the first time, people had somewhere to return after the hunt, somewhere that carried memory and meaning. In those fragile shadows, the seed of home was planted, a place not only to endure, but to belong. As people began to drift away from the safety of caves, they turned to the earth itself and built with their own hands. Branches were bent into sweeping domes, hides stretched taut across wooden frames, and stones stacked carefully into walls that could stand against the wind. These huts were fragile, often temporary, yet they carried a profound message. Humanity was no longer waiting for nature to provide. Instead, people were reshaping it to meet their needs. Each new structure was a lesson learned, each wall and roof an experiment in strength and design. Within these handmade shelters, families gathered around fire, finding comfort in spaces they themselves had created. In their modest forms, the earliest outlines of community began to appear. The step from fragile huts to lasting villages was more than a change in building, it was a change in destiny. When families chose to remain in one place, the rhythm of life itself shifted. Fields were planted, seasons marked, and the soil became as much a home as the walls built upon it. Stone replaced branches, mud brick replaced hides, and narrow pathways wound between the earliest houses. For the first time, a family could live and die within the same walls, leaving both memory and inheritance behind. What once was only a roof for the night became a legacy for generations. In these first villages, the groundwork of cooperation and identity was born, the blueprint of every city yet to rise. Every flicker of firelight against a cave wall, every stake driven into the earth to hold a roof of reeds, marked more than the fight to keep warm or safe. These fragile shelters whispered the first hints of permanence. For generations, humans had moved with the seasons, chasing herds and water. Now, something shifted. A family that built a hut by the river found themselves returning, season after season, until roots formed in the soil beneath their feet. Without knowing it, they had crossed an invisible line from survival to settlement. Imagine those early builders, crouched in the mud, weaving branches into walls. To them, it was nothing more than keeping out the cold or shielding a child from the rain. Yet their actions carried a weight far beyond their own lives. These were not just shelters. They were declaration signs that humanity was no longer content to drift endlessly. Every woven mat, every stone fitted into place, echoed with possibility. From these humble beginnings grew the first villages, then towns, then cities crowned with monuments that touched the sky. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the marble temples of Greece, all of them trace their lineage back to those first crude huts. The builders could not have known, but they had set a chain in motion that would never be broken. In the quiet crackle of a fire inside a small home, civilization itself was being born. Humanity had not just found a way to survive, it had found a way to belong. And in belonging, it discovered the power to build a future larger than any single life. In the Stone Age, a home was often no more than branches woven together, stones stacked against the wind, or the dark hollow of a cave. Yet within those fragile spaces, something greater than shelter was born. A fire crackled in the center, pushing back the shadows, while laughter, whispers, and the steady rhythm of survival filled the air. Safety from the storm and warmth through the night were essential, but so too was the comfort of knowing that others were close by. These walls, no matter how rough, held more than bodies. They held belonging. As time moved forward, the form of the home transformed. Mud brick houses gave way to stone fortresses, then to timber halls, and later to soaring castles with towers that touched the sky. In the modern age, concrete and steel have shaped cities filled with apartments and skyscrapers. Yet for all the changes in material and design, the purpose remained the same. The home was always about more than what could be built by human hands. It was about what could be felt with insecurity, connection, and identity. Even now, when we walk through the ruins of ancient huts, their walls crumbled and fire pits cold, we are reminded that those people lived as we do. They, too, longed for a place to return after the day's struggles. They, too, cherished the comfort of shared meals and the presence of loved ones in the dark. The home is not defined by its size, shape, or grandeur. Whether a cave lit by flame, a palace adorned with marble, or a small house on a crowded street, its meaning endures. The eternal truth remains. Home is not simply a place, it is a feeling. And that feeling began with our ancestors, when the first shelters became sanctuaries of the human spirit.